Somewhere in Shanghai, a man lives under a stolen identity, a fake Australian passport, the name Konstantinos Achilles Vase. His real name is Low Tech Joe, and the US Department of Justice wants him in handcuffs. He has owned a $250 million super yacht, a Manhattan penthouse, a Beverly Hills mansion, a Picasso, a Basquiat, a Van Gogh, and a Monet. He flew Leonardo DiCaprio on private jets. He financed The Wolf of Wall Street, a film about financial fraud, using stolen money. The sum stolen? At minimum $4.5 billion, drained from a Malaysian government fund called 1MDB. The US Department of Justice called it the largest kleptocracy case in American history. This is not a story about a rogue trader, it's a story about a system, governments, banks, lawyers, and at least one sitting prime minister that collectively looked away while billions evaporated from a developing nation.
Malaysia, 2009. A country with ambition, a booming capital, an expanding middle class, and a new prime minister determined to announce Malaysia's arrival on the world stage. Najib Razak's instrument, a sovereign wealth fund. Norway does it, Singapore does it, Abu Dhabi does it. These funds invest public money for long-term national benefit. In February 2009, Najib established One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB. Its mandate? Raise capital through government-backed bonds, invest in energy and real estate, generate returns for national development. Najib chaired its advisory board and held personal veto power as finance minister. Into this credible government-backed vehicle, a 27-year-old with no official title walked through the front door and never left. His name was Joe Low. Born in Penang, educated at Harrow and Wharton, Low was phenomenally charismatic, with a gift for appearing next to people of enormous influence. By his mid-20s, he was hosting dinners for Arab sheiks and positioning himself as a bridge between Malaysia and Gulf capital. He held no official position at 1MDB. His name didn't appear in public documents, but investigators would determine he was operationally everything. He selected the deals. He directed the money flows. He coordinated the bribes. He was the architect of a system that for 6 years extracted billions from a government fund and routed them through shell companies and offshore accounts into his personal control. Within months of 1MDB's creation, Najib signed a joint venture with PetroSaudi International. PetroSaudi was a major Saudi oil company contributing $2.7 billion in assets. 1MDB would invest $1 billion for a 40% stake. The reality? PetroSaudi was a private company. Its contributed assets, oil rights in Turkmenistan, were rights PetroSaudi didn't actually own. The valuation was completed in a single day by a consultant hired by PetroSaudi. When 1MDB wired $1 billion, only $300 million reached the joint venture. The remaining $700 million was diverted to a Swiss account belonging to a shell company called Goodstar Limited, registered in the Seychelles, sole shareholder Joe Low. Over the next 2 years, through additional loan arrangements, another $830 million followed the same route. Total extracted, $1.83 billion. The PetroSaudi executives were convicted in Switzerland in 2024 and sentenced to 6 and 7 years in prison. By 2012, 1MDB needed fresh capital. The solution? Issue bonds through a prestigious Wall Street bank whose name would signal legitimacy to global markets. Enter Goldman Sachs. Between 2012 and 2013, Goldman arranged 3 bond offerings raising $6.5 billion total, more than Malaysia's annual healthcare budget. Goldman charged fees of 9 to 11%, roughly 30 to 100 times the market rate, netting an estimated $600 million. Of the $6.5 billion raised, $2.7 billion was diverted to offshore accounts controlled by Low and his associates. Goldman's own internal intelligence unit had warned against doing business with Joe Low. The warning was ignored. Tim Lessner, Goldman Southeast Asia chief, arranged a private meeting between Lowe and CEO Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman headquarters in December 2012, after compliance staff had spent 3 years blocking Lowe as a client. Lessner pleaded guilty to money laundering and bribery in 2018. Roger Ng, his subordinate, was convicted at trial in 2022. Goldman paid $2.9 billion to settle with Malaysia in 2020, and in May 2026 agreed to pay an additional $500 million to settle a shareholder lawsuit over its concealment of risks. Goldman was not a victim of this scheme. It was structurally essential to it. To make the Goldman bonds credible, Lowe needed a reputable guarantor. He engineered arrangements with Abu Dhabi sovereign funds, IPIC, and its subsidiary ABAR, who agreed to guarantee 1MDB's bonds in exchange for fees. The fees were redirected not to the official Abu Dhabi entities, but to a British Virgin Islands shell company with a nearly identical name, controlled by Lowe's network. IPIC eventually discovered it had been defrauded and sued Goldman Sachs, claiming conspiracy. The guarantees were real, the payments were not. The fraud's unraveling came not from regulators or auditors, but from a blog. Claire Recastle-Brown, a British journalist covering Malaysia, on her site The Sarawak Report, began asking the obvious question: where does Joe Lowe's money come from? She saw him at the 2013 premiere of The Wolf of Wall Street, standing next to Leonardo DiCaprio, who thanked Lowe by name at his 2014 Golden Globe acceptance speech. In early 2015, a former Petro-Saudi executive named Xavier Justo handed her hard drives containing internal documents, emails, and financial records, proving the mechanics of the fraud. Recastle-Brown published her investigation in February 2015. Najib's government moved fast. His attorney general, reportedly preparing criminal charges against Najib, was fired. His deputy prime minister, who had publicly questioned 1MDB, was fired. The 1MDB audit was classified as an official secret. Then, the Wall Street Journal reported something more damaging. Nearly $700 million traceable to 1MDB landed in Najib Razak's personal bank accounts. His government initially claimed it was a $61 million private donation from Saudi royalty. Under pressure, the figure grew. Eventually, they acknowledged $681 million. No coherent explanation has ever been given. Investigations opened across 8 countries. Singapore revoked bank licenses and imposed record fines. Switzerland froze hundreds of millions. The U.S. Department of Justice filed civil forfeiture complaints in 2016, recovering condominiums in Manhattan and Beverly Hills, a private jet, a stake in a London hotel, artwork including a Basquiat, a Monet, a Van Gogh, and the 91-meter superyacht Equanimity, seized off Bali in 2018. The political consequences were seismic. Malaysia's 2018 general election, the first in the country's history to unseat its ruling party after 6 decades of unbroken power, turned almost entirely on 1MDB. Najib Razak was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 12 years in his first trial. A second conviction added 15 years and a $2.8 billion fine. He began serving in 2022. The first former Malaysian head of government to be imprisoned. A pardons board halved his 12-year sentence in 2024, provoking fierce public controversy. Joe Lowe has never been extradited. He has never stood trial. He has never served a single day in prison. What made this possible was not merely greed. Greed is always present. 4 structural conditions made it catastrophic. 1MDB borrowed cheaply because a government stood behind its debt. That trust was weaponized. The citizens of Malaysia inherited $6.5 billion in bonds they didn't know were being issued on their behalf. They are still paying. Every layer, the murabaha notes, the joint ventures, the Abu Dhabi structures, the Cayman vehicles, served one purpose: ensuring each actor saw only their piece of the chain. This is what forensic accountants call layering. The more transactions across more jurisdictions, the more invisible the starting point becomes. Goldman was warned by its own intelligence staff not to work with Joe Low. It did anyway. The fees were too large, the bankers too incentivized, compliance outranked by revenue. This is not unique to Goldman. It is endemic to institutions where profit centers hold more power than risk management. Najib was simultaneously Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and Chair of 1MDB's advisory board. When his deputy raised concerns, he was fired. When his Attorney General moved toward charges, he was fired. When the national audit was completed, it was classified. This is what kleptocracy looks like from the inside. Not dramatic villainy, but the quiet, procedural removal of every institution that might say no. Goldman's 2026 shareholder settlement suggests consequences still unspooling nearly a decade after the story broke. Claire Rucastle-Brown, whose reporting changed Malaysian political history, was sentenced in absentia in 2024 to 2 years in prison for criminal defamation brought by a Malaysian royal she had reported on during her 1MDB investigation. She remains in London, appealing. Xavier Huster, the whistleblower who gave her the documents, was arrested in Thailand on charges brought by PetroSaudi and served 18 months before release. The people who built the fraud received years of institutional protection. The people who exposed it were prosecuted. The Equanimus was seized, sold, renamed Tranquility, and chartered out at $1.23 million a week. In 2019, Kylie Jenner celebrated her birthday on board it. Joe Low, somewhere in Shanghai, presumably watched the news. $4.5 billion, one fugitive, one imprisoned prime minister, one Wall Street bank at $3.4 billion in settlements and counting, and a nation still paying the debt taken in its name without its knowledge, while a 27-year-old with a Harrow education threw parties in Las Vegas that cost more than the annual salary of 1,000 Malaysian teachers. The cause of death? Systemic failure, enabled by greed, secured by the deliberate destruction of every mechanism that might have said no. The patient never had a chance, and it did not die of natural causes.